The Enlightenment is traditionally summed up in the idea from the philosopher Immanuel Kant as the ethic that you should dare to think your own thoughts. So Kant's ideal was that each of us think our own thoughts. Each of us becomes what he called autonomous. Instead of being told what to think, we figure out what to think for ourselves. And that way, when we agree on things, we will agree on the right things because we each came to those ideas through our own thinking powers. You can imagine how difficult this is, though, because we just had a week that was about ideology. We were just thinking about all the things we do automatically in life. We submit to authorities all the time, and we receive influences through advertising and other ideologically powerful sources. So we can't just assume that the thoughts that we think are our own. We have to do certain things to protect our modes of communication so we can actually think our own thoughts. So Kant was working in the late 1700s, and if we fast forward quite a lot in time into a realm where the people that we're talking about are still alive, we arrive at the work of Jürgen Habermas, who is quoted extensively in our readings. And Habermas wanted to essentially update Kant's project. So Habermas is associated with the Institute for Social Research. He is in the legacy of the Frankfurt School. So if you recall, the Frankfurt School reacting against the Nazis, trying to promote freedom from ideology. And Habermas is on the more optimistic side of the Frankfurt School thinkers. So he thought that, and he thinks that by adopting a certain understanding of how communication works, we can think more clearly and come to rational, good decisions together. And he calls that way that we are supposed to think together communicative action. Communicative action. And he contrasts it with instrumental action. So instrumental action is when you become the instrument of somebody else. So for example, a while ago I had a job that was on movie sets, and one of the jobs that I had there was to shovel snow so that we could make the weather look as though it was the summer when it wasn't. So I had to shovel snow out of the way of the camera. So I was very much an instrument in those situations. People shout at me, "Matt, go shovel the snow out of the way there." Along I come with my shovel, I shovel the snow. That's instrumental action. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not how we make decisions together. It's you or me turning ourselves into a machine that serves the interests of a larger machine. That's instrumental action. It's like you become a tool. Communicative action happens when you keep your autonomy. You're still a rational thinking creature, and you're not just being told to do what to do by a boss, but you're in dialogue with other people making a decision about what to do together. Communicative action is more likely to happen, for example, if you're living with a bunch of people and you have a problem with the plumbing or the electricals or something like that, and then you all have to talk with each other and decide, okay, what are we going to do as the people who live here? That's a more democratic situation, and that is the sort of situation that communicative action emerges from. But Habermas wants to see communicative action happening much more widely than that. He wants to take it as an ideal for democratic circumstance. There is a threat to communicative action. So even leaving aside just the pure force of coercion that we happen in the world, where we don't always have a choice in what we say, or maybe even what we think. But even if we have a situation when we are talking with each other freely, we could still come to the wrong decisions together. It is possible for us all to make the same mistakes at the same time. And this is the notion of stereotypes. So stereotypes. Yes, how are things going back there? Did you find everything Okay. Yes. So a stereotype is an idea that sticks around like a rock, and it doesn't receive evidence. You can't refute a stereotype with evidence. When someone has a stereotypical idea, oftentimes they cling to it, and you argue at them. You try and convince them with scientific studies or with good logic, with good examples, but they're sticking to their idea. They want to keep the idea that they have. The most classic examples of stereotypes involve racism. So as you probably know, if you have friends who have racist ideas, simply telling them that the world isn't the way that they think it is usually not enough to convince them to become less racist. And even showing people statistical studies, economic studies, or other kinds of evidence is often not enough to defeat racism. And we see many examples in the news and so forth. So racism is often driven by stereotypes. People have had a bad experience with some sort of person in the world, and they just cling to that stereotypical idea of a certain kind of person. So stereotypes, when a group of people share them, can cause the whole group democratically to vote for a bad thing together. The way that the Nazis came to power in Germany was ultimately through a vote. They were democratically elected eventually because the people of Germany voted for that. And that was obviously a terrible mistake. Things went terribly after that, but at a certain point, they all voted for that together. So it's possible for a democratic group of people to make a mistake all at the same time. That's the threat that stereotypes present in the public sphere. So how do we escape from stereotypes? How do we escape from collective sort of delusions or mistakes that can lead us all down a bad path together? I'll give you two examples of ways that thinkers have tried to escape from this problem. One of them is called standpoint theory, or feminist standpoint theory. And this is associated with an institutional ethnographer named Dorothy Smith, for example, and a number of other feminist thinkers. And the idea of standpoint theory is that the people who have the greatest understanding of problems in society are probably the people who have the most intense problems. So if you think about the example of someone who is super rich, say if you are so rich that you have a helicopter that just flies you where you want to go. So you step out your front door of your mansion or something like that, and then you get into your helicopter and somebody just flies you across town to wherever you want to go. You will have no understanding of how traffic is a problem. You'll think, why do people complain about traffic? Why are people complaining about potholes on the roads or other problems getting around? I don't have this problem. I just get in my helicopter. Surely other people can figure it out. Whereas those of us who are transiting around every day, driving around every day, we have a deep understanding of the problems of traffic. Does anybody live in North Delta? Has anybody lived in North Delta? Okay, so probably my guess is people who have lived in North Delta have the greatest understanding of the Metro Vancouver region of what's wrong with traffic congestion, because escaping from North Delta is extremely difficult once the dump trucks get on the road and everybody's honking at each other. It's not a very well-designed part of town for traffic. So standpoint theory is the idea that people who have experience of the problems will understand the problems the most. Now, it also has a little bit of a problem in that education is itself a privilege. So if you need a certain amount of education, a certain amount of access to information to make informed decisions in the world, then you could potentially become so impoverished that your perspective actually doesn't have much decision-making ability in confronting the problems of the world. So there is a potential problem with standpoint theory in that certain privileges can increase our knowledge of the world also. So maybe there's a balance here. But the point still stands that often rich people make mistakes that they wouldn't make if they had more experience of being like normal people or even like impoverished people. Another way of thinking about of trying to think our way out of stereotypes is what some theorists have called avant-gardism. And avant-gardism has many different versions. It's often associated with artistic and other creative movements. And the idea of an avant-garde is that a certain group of thought leaders, a certain group of influencers might be more informed than the rest of us and might break down stereotypes. So if you become intensively well-informed enough about something, whether that's because you have been underprivileged or for another reason, you might become the leader of a cultural movement that breaks down the stereotypes and causes society to escape from those stereotypes. So avant-gardism is the idea that a certain part of society will lead the other parts of society to a state of enlightenment. However, you can also imagine some problems with this, because how do you decide who is a leader intellectually? How do you decide whose influence to take? And how do you do that without sacrificing your own critical thinking skills? Many people try to influence us in the world, but only some of those people will help us down good paths. So the theory of the avant-garde is sometimes used by wannabe dictators to just appoint themselves to positions of power and saying, well, I'm smarter than you, so you should do as I tell you. So you can get into trouble with the avant-gardist approach also. So I don't have any all-encompassing solutions for you for the problem of stereotypes in the commons, but I think we can discuss some practical situations